All right, man. Welcome to Pro 777 Radio. This is hour one of episode 692. It is Jason and I today, and we're going to be covering the LDS, or the Mormons. Jason wrote some pretty extensive notes. Anything you want to mention before we get in, Jason?
Well, I certainly learned one big thing about all of this, and that's that there are striking similarities with L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology that I did not know about.
Right. There's two things. I actually looked at some things as well when I was doing the imagery for this. I did some lookups, and I didn't realize how much mainstream controversy there has been against the authenticity of this supposed church. And another thing we'll mention is most people are aware there's a big controversy directly involving police, the church, and the state of Utah around Legos of all things. In my view, it's going to be a big deal. It's gone to federal court. Jason wrote it in at the very end of this episode, and we'll mention it. But it will be very telling, the outcome of what happens here. And as we cover this faith, I guess we'll call it, you'll see it's kind of an odd duck, wouldn't you say, Jason?
Yeah, the similarities, like I said, with Scientology and the work of L. Ron Hubbard, if you want to call it work. I mean, do I be rude right up front and just say it was all a great big con, both of them?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of mainstream writing that says these kinds of things. When I was in, I think it was my 20s, I decided I was going to try to find my birth parents. And the two things they can say is whether you can find them. They said no. So the state of California was blocking me. The other thing is what religion you're to be raised. Those are the two in the state of California. Those two things birth parents can say about children they're putting up for adoption. I made some relationships trying to get around all this. And I was told, get this, that I should go to the Mormons because they have some of the most extensive birth records in the country. And that's what I was told in, the early 80s, probably close to 1983 or 84. So there's all that.
But those records would only go back to the 1800s because that's when this whole thing started.
It was just astonishing to me to hear that, because why? Why does a church in Utah have the most extensive birth records, particularly someone in the state of California who was adopted in the state of California looking for birth records sent to a church in Utah that supposedly has some of the best? I mean, why do they have the best records? What's going on there?
A good question. And did you do it?
No, I didn't contact the church. The whole thing is really quite a tragedy because I fought, and I was finally handed all the original documents, but they'd redacted everything. And unfortunately, I lost those original documents, had to go back later and get them. And here's the tragedy. The original documents, someone just took a black marker and redacted it. But when I got back the other one, they had put these little blackout things and photocopied it. My point being is when we entered the computer age, I almost certainly could have got around the original redaction.
That's a thing.
It's a thing, but I don't think it really matters now. It's pretty certain that my birth mother is no longer with us.
All right, shall we?
Let's do it.
Mormonism, which is officially called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is a 19th century American restorationist religion that was founded by Joseph Smith in upstate New York. It claims to be the restored true Church of Jesus Christ after a complete apostasy of the original church. Central to the faith is the idea that God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to the teenage Joseph Smith in a vision in the year 1820 and told him that all existing churches were wrong and that he would be used to restore the fullness of the gospel. This first vision is presented as the foundational event for the Mormons, followed by visits from the angel Moroni and the translation of the Book of Mormon from golden plates inside of a hat. However, one of the most striking and not often mentioned aspects of early Mormonism is its deep and direct connection to Freemasonry.
And there it is. So two things. I guess with language like that, you can see why the mainstream Christian founding of this nation had problems with the authenticity, calling into question right out of the gate what they've been selling. The other thing is they don't have that patina of ancientness on their faith. But I will say this, as an outsider looking in, I tried to count how many times I've driven across this country. It's 30 something. I'm not even sure. But every time you cross the border going into Utah, the streets are freaking beautiful. The overpass, I mean, that place is manicured compared to so many other places that you drive through coast to coast. And as an outsider looking in, I will further say they seem to be quite successful compared to other groups at families and other things, maybe business too. But again, that's an outsider looking in.
They do have certain positive aspects about them, but I'm not sure if they're worth the trade for what you get if you're part of this whole thing.
Well, I think your last bullet is going to tell us a lot. How will this church that has mottos, like I wrote it right into the episode image, choose right is one of their big mottos. And what we saw was favoritism at a level that's basically astonishing. So we're all going to get a front row view to whether they talk the talk and walk it or whether they don't.
Before going further, it is worth laying out the core beliefs of Mormonism and how they differ from traditional Christianity. Mainstream Christian denominations generally hold to the concept of the Trinity, or a triune God, which means one God that exists in three co-equal persons. This is seen in many religions, in fact, many of which are far older than Christianity. For Christianity, however, they view this concept as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, and teach that the Bible is the complete and final word of God. Mormonism, interestingly, rejects both of these ideas. Latter-day Saints teach that God the Father has a physical body of flesh and bone, that Jesus Christ is his literal spirit son and is the firstborn among many spirit children, and that the Holy Ghost is a separate personage of spirit. This is not the Trinity. It is actually three distinct beings. Mormons also believe in a pre-mortal existence in which all human beings lived as spirit children of God before they would be born on earth. The purpose of life is to gain a physical body, be tested, and progress toward becoming like God. This leads to one of the most distinctive doctrines called exaltation. Faithful Latter-day Saints believe that through temple ordinances, obedience, and the atonement of Christ, they can become gods themselves in the next life, creating and ruling over their own worlds. This teaching of human deification is rejected by virtually all other Christian traditions. In addition to the Bible, Mormons accept three other books as scripture: the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. They also believe in continuing revelation through a living prophet who stands at the head of the church. Temple rituals, including the endowment, eternal marriage, called sealings, and baptism for the dead, are all considered essential for the highest degree of salvation. Most Christian churches do not practice any of these ordinances and regard them as either unnecessary or theologically incorrect. Finally, Mormonism teaches a complex afterlife with three main degrees of glory called celestial, terrestrial, and telestial, rather than a simple heaven and hell division. To sum up, while Latter-day Saints use Christian language and revere Jesus Christ, their understanding of God, Scripture, salvation, and the potential of human beings is fundamentally different from historic Christianity. These differences are not minor. They actually represent a distinct theological system, one that began with Joseph Smith's claims of a total restoration of the true church.
Yeah, you're starting to show the crossovers that we see from L. Ron Hubbard. Doesn't the other group have eternal marriage as well?
No, it doesn't. Not that I've come across. They do have the billion-year-long contracts for certain members, though.
Oh, I thought I remember when we covered it, when they're married forever, which I think is what we're getting at here, beyond death. Now, I'm sure someone will see it in the chats. I think I remember that, but we'll see the crossovers as we go along. And really, this is quite eye opening for people who have never really looked at it, because let's face it, this is just not even to have the idea of a trinity, because that echoes back to the truths of nature, which we've covered so many times. But let's carry on here.
Mormon theology also includes some highly distinctive and what could be called unusual teachings about Jesus, Lucifer, and the cosmos. According to Latter-day Saint doctrine, Jesus Christ and Lucifer, or Satan, are literal spirit brothers. Both were among the spirit children of God the Father in a premortal existence. Jesus was the firstborn and the one who was chosen to carry out the Father's plan of salvation by coming to earth, receiving a body, and atoning for humanity. Lucifer, who was also a high-ranking spirit son, proposed an alternative plan that would have forced everyone to be saved and given him the glory. When his plan was rejected, he rebelled, taking a third of the spirit children with him, and was cast out of heaven. He became Satan, the adversary. This idea that Jesus and the devil are brothers is one of the teachings that most sharply separates Mormonism from traditional Christianity, which regards Jesus as the eternal, uncreated Son of God and Satan as a fallen, created being.
So they don't have angels, it sounds like?
Oh no, they have angels.
They do. As you were reading this, I've read so many spiritual texts from all over the world. I don't think I've even ever held a Book of Mormon. Maybe I should take some time and read it. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely its own thing. I've learned enough about it now to
I mean, I'm with you. As we got into this, I was surprised to see how different it is.
It is.
It would be interesting to know, maybe we'll look it up, how predominant it is across the country outside of Utah. And also, like, we covered other things like people trying to get out of religions. I wonder how much of that goes on in Utah, in the Mormon LDS centers. Like when you drive through the state, it says everywhere, LDS controls this, LDS runs that. I mean, it's everywhere.
I had a friend before I moved to Louisiana I used to hang out with all the time, whose family had been Mormons, and the father had stayed with the church, and the mother, they separated, and the children got away, and they wanted to stay away.
Utah also has some of my favorite places to visit while driving, actually the Southwest as a whole, but in Utah, places like Moab, it's simply breathtaking. There's nothing to compare it to, like Arches and other places. It is incredible, the things that we can visit in this country, and that would be one of them.
I've actually driven through it, and it is very, very beautiful.
Oh, you can see why Hollywood hung out there for probably close to 2 decades doing Westerns. I think there was a lot of filming in Arches, if I remember correctly.
Another distinctive teaching comes from the Book of Abraham, which is part of the Pearl of Great Price. In it, Joseph Smith describes a star or planet called Kolob, said to be the nearest to the throne of God. According to the text, time on Kolob operates differently from time on Earth, with 1 day on Kolob equaling 1,000 years on Earth. God the Father is said to reside near Kolob, and it is presented as the governing body in the heavens. Critics have long pointed out that the Book of Abraham was supposedly translated from Egyptian papyri that Joseph Smith acquired in the 1830s. In 1835, Joseph Smith had purchased Egyptian mummies and papyri and announced that he could translate them. He produced what became the Book of Abraham, complete with the Kolob cosmology and unique teachings about the nature of God and premortal life. When fragments of those same papyri resurfaced in the 20th century, professional Egyptologists identified them as ordinary Egyptian funerary texts called the Book of Breathings, along with related documents that had no connection whatsoever to Abraham. The church, not surprisingly, later adjusted its explanation, suggesting the papyri may have served only as a catalyst for revelation rather than a literal translation. The original claim, however, had been that Joseph was translating the actual writings of Abraham. These teachings, that Jesus and Lucifer are brothers, that God lives near a star called Kolob, and that human beings can progress to become gods, form part of the broader Mormon cosmological system. They are not peripheral ideas. They are woven into the religion's understanding of the nature of God, the purpose of life, and the potential destiny of humanity. To most traditional Christians, they represent a complete departure from biblical doctrine. To Latter-day Saints, they are simply part of the restored gospel that was revealed through Joseph Smith. Much like L. Ron Hubbard, it seems that Joseph Smith was also quite the science fiction writer.
So did you get a sense that this Kolob planet is like way out in our so-called, area, or is it like way out in the universe somewhere?
I didn't really get any notion of it whatsoever. By the way, do you remember the 1970s Battlestar Galactica?
Of course.
Well,
Lauren Green.
right. Well, apparently Glenn A. Larson, the producer, was a Mormon. And in the mythology of Battlestar Galactica, they were talking about the Lords of Kobol. He just switched the letters. He was a Mormon and he was drawing from his Mormon mythology.
Well, I guess that worked because that was pretty successful. I think maybe even more so after the fact.
Yep. They released the 2-hour pilot for the show in the movie theaters and it did pretty well. And then it went on TV. And unfortunately, it was so cost prohibitive at the time, they ended up not renewing it. But yeah, it was a great series for what it was in the 70s.
Yeah, it was a thing. I remember when it was on, but it seems to me that later on it gathered quite a cult following.
Yeah, it did. And then up in the mid 2000s, they did the reboot of it and drew a lot from the original, but modernized it, of course, and changed and added things and did things I didn't like. I didn't watch it because of that, but that show was quite popular for many years.
Yep, I remember it.
One of the more distinctive and frequently mocked practices of Mormonism is the wearing of temple garments, which are often referred to by outsiders as Mormon underwear or magic underwear. The magic underwear are special 2-piece white undergarments that adult members are required to wear once they have received their temple endowment. The garments are marked with specific embroidered symbols on the breast, navel, and knee areas that correspond to the signs, tokens, and covenants of the endowment ceremony. Members are expected to wear them day and night for the rest of their lives as a constant reminder of the promises they made in the temple. The practice of magic underwear originated with Joseph Smith in Nauvoo in the early 1840s. Around the same time, he introduced the full endowment after becoming a Freemason. Early versions were longer, one-piece garments that more closely resembled ceremonial clothing, and the symbols themselves show clear parallels to Masonic emblems such as the compass and square. While the church today describes the garment as a sacred outward expression of inward commitment rather than anything magical, earlier folk beliefs sometimes attributed protective powers to it. Critics have long noted that the entire concept of secret, sacred underclothing marked with ritual symbols fits neatly into the same pattern of Freemasonic influence that is already visible in the temple ceremony itself.
So a couple of things. I included images on the episode image of these garments, and I read all about it. But I mean, to be fair, I get what they're doing here. Do you remember in Fiddler on the Roof? I think it's maybe in the beginning when he's singing Rich Man or something, or sometime around there, he says something to the effect of, why do we wear these little apron thread things? And basically what he's saying is to constantly remind them of their faith, which is what's going on here. And of course, as you mentioned, there was an undertone of these will protect you, but let's face it, the mind precedes all. So if you're wearing those and you feel protected, again, the mind precedes all. But I can see how people would mock it, I guess.
Well, again, the person that I was friends with, he made a pretty funny joke about the whole thing, that he called them the magic underwear. That's where I actually got that from. And then I read it again multiple times looking this stuff up.
Well, I've heard that very phrase myself. So yeah, it's a thing.
Getting back to the history, Joseph Smith became a brother of the Freemasonic Lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois on March 15th, 1842. He was initiated as an entered apprentice and raised to the degree of Master Mason the very next day.
Huh.
Just 6 to 7 weeks later, on May 4th and 5th, 1842, he introduced the full temple endowment ceremony to a small group of close associates, nearly all of whom were also Masons, in the upper room of his red brick store. This is the same space that was used by the newly formed Nauvoo Masonic Lodge. Early Mormon leaders who experienced both systems openly noted the similarities. Heber C. Kimball, who was one of the first to receive the endowment, wrote that there was a similarity of priesthood in Masonry, and that Joseph believed Masonry was taken from priesthood but has become degenerated. Other early saints described Masonry as a stepping stone or preparation for the true endowment that Joseph had restored. To make things plain and clear here, the timing is extremely tight. Joseph learns the Masonic rituals and almost immediately begins using very similar ritual forms, handshakes or tokens, signs, penalties, clothing, including aprons with compass and square symbols, and dramatic presentation styles in what would become the LDS Temple Endowment. The Mormon Church today acknowledges some similarities in presentation and clothing, but maintains that the endowment came by revelation and that any parallels are merely superficial or point to ancient shared origins. Critics and historians, however, point to the direct chronological link, Joseph's personal Masonic experience, and the specific ritual elements that were borrowed or adapted from Masonry as evidence that the temple ceremony drew heavily from 19th century Freemasonry.
Well, with that bit of historical account, we start to get a view under the hood. Looks like Mr. Smith had a golden ticket, wouldn't you say, Jason? Joins the Masons, enters the temple, and becomes a master the next day.
Well, I've heard of that happening today, that they fast track people when they're just trying to get members. So maybe that was something similar that they did back then because they were just trying to get members in these smaller towns out in the frontier. Who knows?
No, I haven't heard that. So this is common. You've heard of this going on.
I've heard of it in the modern time, yes. My Uncle Bill, he's passed now, but he was a 32nd degree and also a Shriner. When I was talking to him about it, probably over 15 years ago at this point, he said that that was starting to become more and more common because so many younger folks just weren't interested in doing all of the memory work that you need to do for the 3 degrees. So they had started fast tracking people over a weekend just to get them to be official Masons.
Well, I'm under the impression that Masonry back in the 1800s was quite a bit different than what it is now, particularly the open problems that James Shelby Downard and others have covered. But my mom's dad was a Mason, and almost all the blue collar people in many cities were. And he wasn't really practicing, at least for the last 20 or 30 years of his life. But when he died, they actually showed up at the door and made sure he was buried and helped my grandmother with everything. My dad's dad was also a Mason, but as far as I can tell, never really practiced at all. And the same thing, when he was died, they contact, but he had been a captain in the military, so they just didn't need any help or whatever they offer.
I had a similar situation when my father passed. He was also a 32nd degree Freemason, and he died kind of unexpectedly. It happened a lot faster than they were anticipating, and they did step in and make sure everything was taken care of, which I thought was very considerate of them.
That's what I thought for my mother's father, because she could use the help. She was older, and they did everything. I think another thing they did is they may have collected the regalia and books and things like that, if I'm not mistaken. But again, Masonry in those times was very different. It was common as peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a blue collar worker to be in a Masonic fraternity. It was everywhere, and it was as common can be in my grandparents' day.
Well, Freemasonry was taken very seriously by those involved with it, to the point that they were doing things that was ticking off people who weren't Masons, to the point that they thought that Freemasons were interfering so much in government that there became an anti-Mason political party in the 1800s. So, yeah,
That's
people
right.
were taking this stuff very seriously.
Well, early on in America, there were a number of times when people went hard at Masonry, viewing them as a problem. And I think for the most part, that didn't become known mainstream a lot. But by the time we get up to the lifetime of James Shelby Downard, who could actually take apart and lay out for us commoners what was going on and how they did it, it's more than a problem. It's an actual cancer on society.
Joseph Smith was born on December 23rd, 1805, in Sharon, Vermont, into a family that was deeply involved in the religious fervor of the time, but also dabbled in folk magic and treasure seeking. His father and older brother, Hiram, which is a name that should sound familiar to those familiar with Freemasonry, had connections to Freemasonry, even before Joseph did. The family moved to the Palmyra area of western New York, which was burning with revivalism during the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was a religious revival that took place during the late 18th and early 19th centuries in the United States. It spread religion through revivals and emotional preaching, and sparked a number of schismatic movements. Revivals were key to the movement and attracted hundreds of converts to new denominations. The Methodist Church used circuit riders to reach people in frontier locations. Where the Smith family moved to in the Palmyra area was a hotbed of new religious movements, anti-Masonic sentiment after the Morgan affair, and folk magic practices.
I mean, you can imagine what it must have been like when he started to mainstream what he was doing, you know? I want to get recognized as a new religion. You know, you can only imagine how, society must have taken that at the time.
Yeah, it didn't go over with a lot of people.
Well, how'd you find out? Well, there was this hat, how did all that go over?
We're going to get to that. And
Yep.
a lot of people were just like, seriously, man? We should take a moment to explain the Morgan affair before we move on. William Morgan, who was a bricklayer and stonemason living in Batavia, New York, announced that he was going to publish a book that exposed the secrets of Freemasonry, which would include the rituals, oaths, and signs of the first 3 degrees. Morgan had been a Mason, but had become disgruntled. Local Masons, not surprisingly, were strongly opposed to the book being released. In September of 1826, Morgan was arrested on trumped-up charges that dealt with a small debt taken from the jail in Canandaigua and was never seen again. He was reportedly abducted by a group of Masons, transported across the Canadian border, and drowned in the Niagara River, or possibly Lake Ontario, depending on the account. No one was ever convicted of his murder, although several Masons were convicted of kidnapping. The disappearance caused a national uproar. Many Americans had already been viewing Freemasonry as a secretive, elitist society, which is correct, that had strange rituals and oaths that seemed to conflict with democracy and Christianity. The Morgan affair confirmed those fears for a lot of people and sparked the Anti-Masonic Party, which was the first third party in U.S. history. This party won elections in several states and helped push the issue of secret societies into national politics. The Morgan affair happened right in Joseph Smith's backyard, so to speak, as the Palmyra, Manchester area is only about 30 to 40 miles from Batavia.
So you can see the problem here. Masonry had been so ingrained in the social services like the police, that they did a false arrest here and then never seemed to be able to figure it out. But they did realize that these guys kidnapped somebody. We're seeing a modern trumped down version of this in Utah now, where it is quite clear that the police acted in favoritism, seemingly because of the religion they're a part of. So you can see how this starts to cause a problem, and the Bible speaks to this. I can't recall the particular scripture, but it's the idea that you can't serve 2 masters. As an example of this, if you walk into a courtroom and you're about to be judged by a judge and you know he's a Mason, well, he's taken other oaths. And if you read some of those oaths, they seem to supersede the oaths that he would have taken for his legal occupation. And that's a problem. That is a huge problem.
Before the first vision accounts and the golden plate story fully took shape, Joseph Smith already had a local reputation as a money digger and glass looker. In the mid-1820s, he was known for using a seer stone. This is the same type of stone that he would later place in a hat to produce the Book of Mormon text. He is supposed to have used it to locate buried treasure, lost objects, or hidden mines. One of the clearest documented episodes involves a man named Josiah Stowell, a relatively well-off farmer from Chenango County, New York. In the fall of 1825, Josiah Stowell hired the 19-year-old Joseph because he had heard that the young man possessed certain means by which he could discern things invisible to the natural eye. Stowell was convinced that an ancient Spanish silver mine existed near Harmony, Pennsylvania. Joseph, his father Joseph Sr., and several other men joined a money-digging company. They boarded at the home of Isaac Hale, who was his future father-in-law, and spent roughly a month digging without success. Joseph later claimed that he eventually persuaded Stowell to abandon the futile search. A surviving agreement from November of 1825 shows the investors formally dividing any gold, silver, or coined money that might be found. The episode did not end quietly. In March of 1826, Stowell's nephew, Peter Bridgman, filed a complaint accusing Joseph of being a disorderly person and an impostor who was bilking his uncle through glass looking. Joseph was brought before a justice of the peace, Albert Neely, in South Bainbridge, which is now Afton, New York. Witnesses testified about Joseph's use of the seer stone. Stowell himself took the stand and defended Joseph, insisting that the young man truly could see things underground. The hearing ended without a formal conviction or fine, and Joseph was released. Surviving court bills and later accounts remain incomplete and disputed, but the incident became one of the earliest public records linking Joseph Smith to the treasure-seeking culture of the time. Joseph continued working for Stowell afterward and was still associated with him when he married Emma Hale in January of 1827. The Stowell money-digging venture is the episode Joseph himself later pointed to when explaining, quote, the very prevalent story of my having been a money digger. Critics have long noted that the same seer stone methods and treasure guardian folklore that surrounded these digs reappear in transformed religious language in the accounts of finding and translating the golden plates.
Well, whatever you might say about Mormonism, they are well funded. I think, and I'm taking a shot in the dark here, it was either the 80s or the 90s, they announced they were putting up a temple in San Diego. I went to the VA that was in La Jolla, so I had to drive quite a ways, but right next to the freeway that goes to La Jolla, of course, the temple went up. And it's a sight to behold. You can look it up online. It is sparkling ivory white and a couple of towers that remind you of like the Tolkien saga. It's quite a structure, to say the very least. And they've done this a number of times. So they're very well funded.
And there's another similarity to Scientology. Joseph Smith claims that in the spring of 1820, at the age of 14, he went into the woods near his home in Palmyra, New York, to pray about which church to join. According to his later accounts, he experienced what Mormons call the first vision, in which God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to him in a pillar of light. They told him that all existing churches were wrong and that he should join none of them. This vision was not widely publicized at the time and would only become central to Mormon teachings decades later. A few years afterward, on the night of September 21st, 22nd, 1823, Joseph claims that the angel Moroni appeared to him 3 times and told him about a record written on golden plates that were buried in a hill that would later become Qumran, that was not far from his home. These plates supposedly contained the history of ancient inhabitants of the Americas, which included a visit by the resurrected Jesus Christ to the New World. Moroni reportedly visited Joseph multiple times over the next 4 years, before finally allowing him to take the plates on September 22nd, 1827.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, this begins when he's 14. 4 years later, he's 18 years old in the scope of what was just laid down.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And as I can see here, he's doing it right at the fall equinox, September 21, 22. Not sure when the actual equinox would have been, but it's right there in the bailiwick. But let's keep going here. Tell me more.
We should take a moment to discuss Moroni, who is the key heavenly figure in Joseph Smith's story. According to Joseph, Moroni was an ancient prophet who lived in the Americas around 400 AD, who finished compiling the record of the story of two main groups who migrated to the Americas from the Middle East, covering the period from roughly 600 BC to around 421 AD on the golden plates, which he then buried. Centuries later, this same Moroni is said to have appeared as a resurrected angel to the teenage Joseph Smith on September 21st, 1823. He told Joseph about the plates hidden in a nearby hill and instructed him on how to obtain them. Moroni supposedly visited Joseph multiple times over the next 4 years, before finally allowing him to take the plates in 1827. This is the same angel whose golden statue now stands on top of many Mormon temples, trumpet in hand, announcing the restoration of the gospel. Moroni is essentially the heavenly spokesman for the entire Book of Mormon.
So again, I'm guessing he's just around 18. They worded a little different here. He was a teenager and the supposed angel spoke to him for 4 years. So probably between 18 and 20, something like that.
And by the way, this is a character that he invented. There is no Moroni in other Christian texts or anything like that.
Well, we're about to find out whether the golden plates would hold up in court, right? Because without witnesses or evidence, it wouldn't.
As stated, Moroni supposedly visited Joseph multiple times over the next 4 years before finally allowing him to take the plates on September 22nd, 1827. Joseph said that he was directed to a stone box that was buried in Hill Cumorah, where he says he found the golden plates, along with the Urim and Thummim, which are special seer stones set in silver bows and a breastplate. Joseph claims that the plates were about 6 inches thick, each plate about 6 by 8 inches, and bound together with 3 rings. The writing was said to be in Reformed Egyptian, which is a language that no scholar has ever independently verified. Almost immediately, the story begins to attract intense local skepticism. Neighbors who knew the Smith family as treasure diggers saw the whole thing as another money-making scheme. Joseph claims that he had to hide the plates and move them several times to keep them from being stolen. The translation process itself was, let's just say, highly unorthodox. Joseph did not work with the plates open in front of him. Instead, he used a seer's stone, often the same one he had used for treasure seeking, that was placed inside of a hat to block out light. He would put his face in the hat and then dictate the English text that supposedly appeared on the stone. The plates were frequently covered with a cloth or not even present in the room during much of this supposed work. Witnesses, like his wife Emma and Martin Harris, described the process as Joseph speaking rapidly while they wrote it down. The first 116 pages, dictated to Martin Harris, were lost when Harris's wife hid them as a way to test Joseph. Rather than retranslate the lost section, Smith claimed that God had instructed him to skip it and translate a different, shorter record that had been prepared for exactly this situation. Because of course God did. This convenient workaround meant that the published Book of Mormon never reproduced the lost pages. The entire translation was completed in roughly 60 to 90 working days, with Joseph producing a roughly 500-page book that was filled with complex narratives, sermons, and prophecies that closely mirrored 19th century King James Bible language and contemporary religious debates.
That's a heck of a tale, but I got stuck when you started describing the plates. So we're told that they are 6 inches thick, 6 to 8 inches. Doesn't say how wide, so I'm just guessing that they were about 6 inches wide. So I did a lookup on that, and gold measuring 6 inches thick, 8 inches long, and 6 inches wide would weigh approximately 200 pounds.
It would also be incredibly soft.
And the other thing, as I'm going through this, I'm looking for common sense things. He found it in a stone box. That's something that you wouldn't really lose, would you?
You wouldn't think so.
No, you wouldn't think so. But carry on, my wayward son.
To lend credibility to his claims, Joseph Smith produced witnesses to the golden plates. There were the 3 witnesses: Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, who all said that an angel showed them the plates and that they heard God's voice declaring the translation was correct. Then there were the 8 witnesses, who were mostly members of the Smith family and close friends, who claimed that they physically handled the plates and turned the pages. These testimonies are still printed in the front of every copy of the Book of Mormon. Notably, none of these witnesses ever claimed to have seen the actual translation process itself, but only the plates or a vision of them. Most of the witnesses later had major fallings out with Joseph or left the church at some point, though some eventually reaffirmed their statements. Critics point out that several were closely related to Joseph Smith or had financial stakes in the book's success, and that their testimonies were given under strong social and religious pressure.
I'm sorry, will you reiterate what supposedly became of the golden plates?
Supposedly, they are returned to the angel Moroni in 1829 after Joseph Smith is done with the translations. But this part of the telling is about the people who are the witnesses who supposedly had visions of them existing.
Well, if we use common sense again, we've already been told that he digs for precious metals. They called him a money digger. And if my calculations are even close to correct on how much a single plate would have weighed, let's cut it in half. Let's say it weighed 50 pounds. So a gold person who's actively dug for precious metals is holding a single plate that is 50 pounds of gold, just to make the common sense observation.
The physical description of the golden plates shifted over time in ways that critics find revealing. Early accounts from Joseph and some of the witnesses described the plates as pure gold, heavy and substantial, with estimates of the weight sometimes reaching 40 to 60 pounds or more. Later statements and recollections tended to soften these details, with some suggesting that the plates were made of a gold alloy or a lighter metal, or that they were not fully examined under ordinary light. The plates were also frequently described as being covered with a cloth or kept out of direct view during the translation process. Combined with the fact that the translation itself was done by placing a seer stone in a hat, supposedly often done without the plates even being present in the room, these varying descriptions allowed considerable flexibility. Critics argue that the lack of a consistent, verifiable physical account of the plates made it easier to maintain the claim without the risk of direct examination or contradiction by outsiders.
So do you recall in all the research that was done here any account of at what age he became a man of means?
No, but he was involved with his family and all the things that they did throughout his early life and into his early adulthood.
It would be interesting to know. That's something I may look up later. But I mean, even their estimate on what the gold weighed, and I said I halved it. Actually, I halved it twice. The initial calculation I did was 200 pounds a plate. And I said 50, and they went under that number. But anyhow, let's keep going.
Joseph's own accounts of the first vision changed significantly over time. The earliest surviving version, which was written in 1832, describes only one divine personage, that being Jesus Christ, and focuses mainly on the forgiveness of Joseph's sins. Later versions from 1835, and especially the official 1838-1839 history, introduce God the Father appearing alongside Jesus and the dramatic declaration that all existing churches were wrong and shift the emphasis toward a complete restoration of the true church. Critics have long noted that the story grew more elaborate and theologically useful as Joseph's prophetic authority expanded. This is very similar to how L. Ron Hubbard kept adding to his space opera story with Xenu and body thetans.
So wait a minute, I'm getting confused here. Did that just recount that initially the angel was the one that got him involved and later it was changed to Jesus and then God got him involved?
So initially, I think it was he had a vision of God and Jesus that came in a pillar of light, and then the angel came later. It gets very convoluted and it changed over time.
Oh, I guess it says the first vision here. So that's what's changed, not how he found the supposed golden plates. I'm just trying to keep track of all this, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, much like Elrond, things were changed and added to and became more and more convoluted as time goes on.
Well, it's interesting. As I did the research I did, putting together the imageries and prepping for this, there was a ton of coverage of the mainstream downing and challenging the authenticity of this religion. And I was a bit surprised to see it, I guess.
Once the translation is finished in the summer of 1829, the next challenge would be getting the book printed. Joseph Smith filed a copyright for the Book of Mormon on June 11th, 1829. Finding a publisher was not easy. Most printers in the area refused the job because they thought the whole thing was rather ridiculous. Eventually, Egbert B. Grandin, who was a local printer in Palmyra, agreed to print 5,000 copies for $3,000, which was an enormous sum in 1829 and equivalent to roughly $100,000 plus in today's money. Martin Harris, one of Joseph's early supporters and scribes, put up the money by mortgaging his 240-acre farm. The book was finally published on March 26, 1830. To say the least, this was a massive financial risk for a group of relatively poor farmers and laborers. Critics have long pointed out how convenient it was that one of the main financial backers, Martin Harris, was also one of the three witnesses. The first edition of the book sold slowly at first, but enough copies got circulated to begin attracting converts and, just as quickly, fierce opposition. Within weeks of publication, Joseph Smith officially organized the Church of Christ on April 6, 1830, in Fayette, New York, with just 6 initial members who were mostly family and close friends.
Well, I'm picking up what you're laying down, and I've been going the occult avenue against the information. So I'm going to state it outright. This man, whoever he was or wasn't, had a golden ticket, I'm going to say. The Book of Mormon, the copyright was filed on a double 911 encode. The first part of the encode is a Marty McFly using June as an inverted 911. So June 11 using the Marty McFly, but even the year breaks down as a 911 encode, which is 1829. 9 and 2 is 11, 8 and 1 is 9. So it's 911 front and back. Then when it comes to the book finally being published, the same is true all over again on March 26, 1830. And you can say that these things are by coincidence or whatever you want, but this is very specific, and it is the formation of a new religion connected to secret societies and a going concern worth an absolute ton of money. And when you said that someone mortgaged a 240-acre farm to cover $100,000 in 1800s money, I didn't look it up, but my initial thought was a 240-acre farm worth $100,000 in those days? Because when you mortgage, you don't get full value, but I guess I would have to look that up to know. It just seems like an extreme number.
The church starts small, but grows quickly, thanks to enthusiastic missionary work. Joseph Smith begins receiving new revelations almost immediately, which are later compiled into the Doctrine and Covenants. These revelations established the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthoods, new church offices, commandments on baptism, the sacrament, tithing, and even dietary rules called the word of wisdom. Converts began pouring in, especially from the burned-over district of Western New York, a region that was so saturated with revivals that it was said to have been burned over by the fires of religious enthusiasm. Missionary success is rapid. By the end of 1830, the church has grown to hundreds of members. Joseph moved the headquarters first to Kirtland, Ohio, and then began eyeing Missouri as the site of the future New Jerusalem or Zion, based on new revelations. Just to be clear, from the very beginning, Joseph Smith had positioned himself as a prophet who spoke for God, with authority equal to or greater than the Bible. This combination of new scripture, ongoing revelation, and a rapidly growing movement made the early Latter-day Saints highly controversial. Neighbors accused them of being deluded, fanatical, or even dangerous. Local newspapers mocked the Golden Plate story and called Joseph Smith a fraud. Tensions rose fast, and the pattern of persecution that would define much of early Mormon history had already begun.
Well, I think it's critical that we don't down the faith of others, but we will cover it honestly. When all is said and done, I never forget that in some of the oldest things I've read, the idea was the last step to enlightenment was imagination. And anyone who's following a spiritual path, I have witnessed, they seem to come at it from many different directions, and there are very successful, highly spiritual people in many places in this world. But what I have learned in the modern age and what most people are witnessing, let's use what we do online as an example. If we see a channel with 1 million followers, what do we know right out of the gate? We know that they're either following the rules or they are part of the agenda, let's say, the information agenda of our era. And at this point, there are really precious few exceptions. There might be someone who's using a hula hoop that is allowed to get to a level, but anyone purveying information to any significant number of minds is, again, either approved by the established censorship system or they are part of it. Here, what I did was a quick lookup. Now, all the way back here, Jason's saying the first place was Kirtland, Ohio, was it, Jason?
Yes.
I think you said. Anyhow, I looked up the first bank, and they did get a bank. What does that tell you? Not everybody gets a bank. That's a golden ticket. Was called the Kirtland Safety Society, telling us just how early they got a bank. They have a university, which is a going concern, with many successful individuals coming out of Brigham Young, many successful sports teams, level after level after level of participation in what we now know to be a closed system that you do not participate in unless you are allowed to do so. Jason, would you add anything else before I wrap up hour one?
Well, the thing about the bank and the other things that you're talking about, we're going to get into that. And it may not seem like such a golden ticket when you hear what actually happened to that bank and the Mormons in general.
Okay, all ears. In the modern era, like when I got interested in metals and I started to learn a lot more about this, I was trying to find a place that I trusted to do this with. And what I learned was to get into the banking side of things, you don't just get there. Almost every case, you're grandfathered in because of what you belong to or who your forefathers were, this kind of thing. But we're going to wrap up hour one, and we're going to take a short break, come back for hour two, and it only gets better from here. Hour one is free to everybody at crow777radio.com. You don't even need a login. You can just hit the site and access it. Members get access to all the comments and forums. They get access to the 2-hour film called Shoot the Moon that has 10 awards out in the world now. It's quite popular right now. Many people are viewing and reviewing it. Also, you get exclusive access to my current solar work, and everything else is free to you that goes on at the site. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. I hope to see you logged in as members, and I'd like to wish everybody a happy, healthy, and higher-minded new era. See you shortly.